Hello and welcome to Car Dealer Live. My name is James Batchelor and thank you very much for joining us for these daily broadcasts on the Car Dealer Magazine YouTube channel, where we talk to people right across the industry. Now, today on the show, I'm delighted to say we're chatting with Nona and Kirill from our friends at Lawgistics, a legal consultancy firm providing specialist motor trade advice and support. Now, we only spoke to Lawgistics last week and we were due to speak to them again in the coming weeks, but we've been inundated with questions from dealers wanting help and advice. So we've brought forward our legal show forward to today. Now, the number one issue that we've been hearing from dealers and dealers have wanted answers to is the F word, and that is furlough. Now, even though it's been in place for some time now and has helped many employers and employees, there are still some very big questions and some big areas, some big grey areas. Hello, Nona and Kirill. Thanks very much for joining us and coming back on so quickly.
Hello.
James. Hi. And now we've got a ton of questions to get through and issues surrounding the furlough scheme. But we'll also be diving into the topic of distance selling as well. Now, we've got a lot to get through in the next 30 minutes or so. Like I said, we've got plenty to chat about, but this is your chance to get answers to questions you may have. So please do drop us a message in the comments box. Right then, well, let's get started with the questions already submitted to us. Nona, if I could come to you first. We've heard from Malcolm in Harrogate. He got in touch with us this morning and he said, are the rules about contacting employees on part-time furlough a bit more relaxed, such as can you email them on furlough days? What would you say to him?
Well, as ever, with everything that happens at the moment, there isn't a great deal of detail on the FFS, flexible furlough scheme, but I can't see there being an issue with that. The issue originally about not contacting employees, I think, was very much an anti-fraud measure. What they didn't want is companies putting people on furlough but having them working in the background. So that was about the original rules around that. I think once you've got people back part-time, I don't think there's going to be a problem with contacting them for quick things during that time they're on furlough. You can't have them working 5 days and only paying 2, but random inquiries, I don't think that's going to be a problem. And I think the anti-fraud stuff has almost gone away with the part-time element of it now.
Yeah. And I suppose there's just an acceptance that that is the mechanism of business and working life. And there are things which you are going to have to talk to your people about, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And life goes on and the government clearly very much want the economy to get going and businesses to get going again. So, I think there will be more flexibility on that. Although I say we still haven't had the promised detail about the flexible furlough scheme yet.
Yeah. Well, hopefully that answers your question, Malcolm. Now, another question that's come in, and it's one that I've wondered about myself, actually. Anonymous asks, I have an employee who is refusing to come back as he is shielding his partner. Now, that's quite a big issue. What can this user, what can Anonymous do about that? Kirill?
There are issues that need to be clarified before a definitive answer can be given, but the things to look into is, say, if they're saying they're shielding their partner, then are they providing some care for the partner, or they're just concerned that they're in the same household? Now, as it stands at the moment, the members of the same household as those who are shielding still with precautions can come to work. There is not an obligation on them to stay at home as well. At the same time, the employers will have to show some flexibility and some understanding. So if, say, they recall a number of them from furlough, so those with genuine need will have probably to go to the back of the queue to be called back to work if they have a genuine requirement. And also the employees will have to check that they're following the official guidance about health and safety at the workplace, which is not particularly onerous, but frankly, social distancing, providing hand washing facilities, etc., that's something to be checked as well, so that is in place. But ultimately, as I say, if someone needs to be called back from furlough and the employer dealt with the situation fairly and being considered to the individual circumstance, they can call you back from furlough.
I suppose it's just understanding it, and it's the employer having a frank conversation with the employee and just trying to understand precisely the situation and how flexible it can be, because as we know, as you well know, not everybody is honest, and I suppose that shielding phrase or line could be used by lots of people. So it's important to really identify what the situation is.
Well, absolutely, yes. It's one thing to be concerned that you can inadvertently bring virus into the household if you're with someone who's shielding. And it's a bit different if you're actually caring for that individual because they need that care. And obviously it gives a high priority. It can be a reason to be felt in itself.
Super.
Sorry, I was just going to say, this people not wanting to come back to furlough is perhaps a bigger issue than certainly the politicians have said it's going to be. I've seen Rishi stand up and say, oh yes, we know everybody really wants to get back from work, but actually not everybody on furlough does want to get back to work. We're hearing they're quite happy on their 80%. Some of those have perhaps got second jobs because you're allowed to do that if your contract allows. So, for a few months they've had two incomes coming in. Okay, one is at 80%. So there's those issues. There are genuine issues like the shielding issue. And again, we've seen Boris and Matt Hancock both stand up and say, oh, we're sure employers will be sympathetic. But that just muddies the waters, really, because we need rules, really, because as Kirill said, you've got to be fair, you've got to listen to everything. But we just can't have people just saying, oh, I'm shielding, I can't get childcare, I'm just not coming back, I don't feel safe, I don't think you've done all the health and safety, whatever reason. And there are lots of these cases coming into us with people that do not want to come back. It's tough for the employer really to do that, and I don't think the government have been particularly helpful because of their sort of glib one-liners they throw out at the daily press briefings. So yeah, it's not an easy situation to kind of work through because of that.
Yeah, no, that's interesting actually, because I mean, it's like you say, one-liners. I mean, that's a classic one-liner, isn't it? It's the assumption that everybody wants to go back to work, and of course, as we all know, that's not always the case, is it?
Yeah.
But very interesting one there.
Yeah.
A question that was emailed to me this morning, actually. Recording your furloughed staff and having paperwork in order has been such a big part of the scheme. Do employers need to record carefully when part-time furlough staff are and aren't working? Could HMRC want to see details of this down the line?
Shall I stay with that, Phil? I think anything furlough is yes, I think is the answer. Sorry for that. Although I've said earlier that the anti-fraud element has gone away, that's the very big side, but there will still be anti-fraud measures in place. HMRC will still want to check. So yes, if your employee is working 2 days a week, you're going to need to keep some sort of register or record. And I think we said HMRC will be going back up to 5 or 6 years. So you need to have that and have that ready, because I'd imagine there will be a huge amount of investigation by HMRC after this, and they're not going to be able to do it in the first few months. So yes, keep those records, go overboard rather than be lazy with it, do more than necessary just so you've got it there. Because I think I've said before, with HMRC, you don't really mess with them. They will assume you're guilty almost, so it's up to you. So yeah, keep that evidence, record it, keep it in a box, make sure you keep it for the next few years, because they could come out at any time in the next 5 or 6 years to have a look at what you did on furlough to make sure you've not claimed more money from the government than you should.
I would just add, I would say at the very least, make sure there is a record of what hours and or days I agreed with that work from FFS, as will be known now, and that the payroll corresponds with the hours agreed. Great,
thank you for that. I understand this is a question that has been sort of posed to your team recently. An employee says she cannot come back to work as their partner is a key worker and they cannot get childcare. Where does the employer stand?
Well, I shall answer this one. In the normal circumstances, the issue with the childcare absolutely would not be a good excuse not to come to work, with the exception of some emergency unforeseen circumstances where there is some kind of breakdown in the childcare arrangements. But it's assumed that the worker will have to be responsible and make arrangements for the childcare. Now, we do not currently live in normal times, sadly, but if the child of a key worker, so there will be provision for the childcare. The child presumably can go to school or nursery, or could. So that will have to be taken into account. Basically, from the furlough perspective, yes, the childcare responsibilities can be a reason for someone to be put on furlough, but that should be seen in the context of the business need requirements. And again, if the employees consider it and consider that there may be a difficulty with the childcare for that particular couple or individual, and that can be then demonstrated, then still, if the business needs dictated, will have to be called back from the furlough, that person will have to make some childcare arrangements. And as I say, it will probably make it easier that the partner is a key worker, so there is some childcare in place for them.
Well, again, I suppose it's much like we were just talking about with shielding. It's a great scheme that's been put in place, but key worker is a very broad term, isn't it? And I suppose it is up to the employer to really identify what the problem is here and how they can be flexible in adapting to this.
It is indeed. We had a number of inquiries where someone was indeed a key worker, say, keeping the transport on the road, but the school was querying the status whether they are a key worker. That is so broad indeed, yes.
Question that came in this morning, actually, and it's something that's crossed my mind before, actually. So the question is, if an employer has got an employee who's gone feral on furlough, what do you put them down as? Gone AWOL?
We've had quite a few of these this week. In fact, Kirill had a very similar case to me.
Oh, really? Yeah.
The same day he was talking about, I said, that's my case. He said, no, it's my case. And it's pretty much exactly the same. It was a mechanic who didn't want to come back. They just didn't want to come back. We don't know why. There was no sort of shielding or key worker or childcare issue going on from there. It may be that perhaps they had this second job that we were talking about and they're quite happy earning that extra money for the moment from there. But I think in both these cases, the employer has had to write to the employee and say, well, I think in both cases, they'd kind of had a row with the employee, and they just said, I'm going. So we don't know whether they resigned or what they did. So we've had to write to the employee and say, you know, after this altercation, it was fine that you needed to go home and calm down, but we expected you to come back the next day. You haven't. Have you resigned? We need to know if you've resigned. So contact us, and we've given them a sort of deadline, sort of 48 hours deadline to come back. Otherwise, we just have to assume you've resigned and put your final pay together and send your P45 in due course. There's not a lot you can do if someone disappears off. Both incidents we've had this week, myself and Kirill, it's been someone who's literally stropped out during the day and said, oh, I'm fed up with this, I don't want this anymore. So it's not clear. And if someone's been there less than 2 years, I quite often say this, it's much easier to let someone go because they don't have the right to go to a tribunal for unfair dismissal unless there's a sort of discrimination issue or a health and safety whistleblowing type issue. But very generally, if they're less than 2 years, you do not have to worry so much. You don't have to go through all those processes. But if you've got someone who's been with you for longer than 2 years and that happens, you've got to at least give them the opportunity to come back. But if they don't, I think it's fine to say, well, we've had to accept that's your resignation. Whether they will pop up with a tribunal claim for constructive dismissal, say, in sort of 1 or 2 months' time, and they only get 3 months, by the way, for an employment tribunal claim. We'll have to deal with that then. But yeah, people have disappeared, but the point of furlough was you're on furlough for a temporary time and you have to come back when we say we need you to come back. Yeah. And certainly the template letters that we were giving out to our members to use, that made that very, very clear. So people can't just say, actually, I'm quite happy at home doing my garden and sitting and getting my suntan up and earning my 80%. I'm fine, thank you, I don't want to come back. they have to come back. You know, this was only ever a temporary thing, so they can't go off, and it's unauthorised absence really with no pay.
Can I just very quickly chip in on the issue of second jobs whilst on furlough? I mean, the normal terms essentially would be normally contract of employment that you have to dedicate all your time to us, and you normally will not be allowed to work with someone else as well as us. These are not normal terms, as I say, and it would be at least courteous for the employee to notify the employer to say, well, by the way, I now got a second job, so that you know. I mean, we recommend still, the furlough allows that, but the employment law is quite separate from the furlough scheme, and we recommend that normally that permission should be at least sought and maybe refused if there is a reason for that, and that is in our suggested templates as well. So we would say the employers still have to guard their interests as well, and just nilly-nilly allow second jobs whilst on furlough.
I suppose in many ways, because the furlough scheme has been extended, I think it's been a couple of times now it's been extended, hasn't it? It's promoted this sort of view that, yeah, okay, well, I don't actually want to come back to work. Because when it was originally put in place, it was clear, the guidance was there, the guidelines were clear for employer and employee. And I suppose, much like you were saying, Nona, the longer it goes on, some people may be thinking, I'm actually quite enjoying this. And so perhaps the job issue can just go away for the time being. It's quite an interesting situation, all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, because at home, my husband's been furloughed all the time. His company haven't said when he's going back yet, and he's been thinking, am I going to be made redundant? Do they want me back? So there's all those sort of issues the employer might have as well, whereas I've been working all the way through and working my socks off. So we're at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think that'll be the same for a lot of households from there. But yeah, he's loving it. You know, he's running 15 miles every day and getting his fitness up, and I'm exhausted at the end of the day. So yeah, it's really, really interesting times, and to see how it all pans out. But ultimately, furlough's temporary. You'll have to go back to work.
Yeah. And just on another point, I suppose the furloughing scheme, because we're not working in normal situations here, do you think the number of people, employers and employees, trying to do things not by the rule book have increased?
Are you going to go, Kirill, then?
You take it then.
Go on there. Yeah. Partly, I think, because people didn't always know what the rules were. So we've had a little bit of that. And certainly at the beginning, I mean, we were on here a few times talking about commission. First, it was no commission. Then it could be commission. Then it was monthly. It was just a big, hot mess, really. And we eventually got that sorted out. And you can kind of understand the confusion, because the government were obviously moving at a very fast pace. And they're not going to think of anything like this flexible furlough scheme. This is new. They got that out and said you had to have been on furlough for at least 3 weeks, which is the minimum furlough period, by the end of June. So that period is gone now. So anybody that has not already been on furlough, so poor old me and Kirill can never be furloughed now. We've missed our opportunity to sit at home on our 80%. We're here. But then someone said, but what about people that have been on maternity leave? And they're like, oh yeah, forgot about them. So if someone's been on maternity leave and that's the reason they've not been on furlough, they can go on furlough. And there are probably going to be some other exceptions. But again, we haven't got the detail. We get the sort of headline come out, and the detail often follows 2, 3, 4 weeks later at the moment. So you can see why people perhaps don't understand the rules, or people are bending the rules, and things are changing all the time. So yeah, it's interesting times.
Yeah. Just had a question that's come in from David. Sorry, you're seeing my gormless look now, which is always what happens in calls, isn't it? Right, David asks, as an employer, can I select individual employees to opt in and out of the scheme as work dictates?
Yeah.
I would say yes. The decision ultimately certainly is with the employer who is to be offered furlough. The employee will have to agree to be furloughed, that's fine, but who is offered, that's the decision of the employer. And as long as the employer, as we discussed previously, gives some consideration to the specific circumstances, and some of them should really cause some sympathy, that is the employee's decision who goes on furlough.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Well, I hope that answers your question there, David. Another one here. Is it true that you can unfurlough people for as little as an hour? What's your view of that? Or is there not a view? Is this another one of those grey areas which it's difficult, it's virtually impossible to answer?
That is quite interesting, and I don't see any reason why they couldn't, because the only rule is they have to be on furlough for a minimum of 3 weeks. So I guess if you took them off, you can put them back on, but when they go back on, they have to go on for that 3 week minimum again.
3 weeks. Yeah. So I mean, that's quite an exceptional circumstance, but effectively it is legal and above board as long as you put that person back onto furlough.
Don't see any problem with that, because of course you've got some people on furlough that are taking annual leave while on furlough, so that means they're getting paid 100% for the furlough time they're on annual leave. So the employer can still claim the 80% from the government, but they have to pay the extra 20% because that employee is entitled to 100% of their pay. And I think a lot of employers are now telling employees to take annual leave, because otherwise they've had all this time off, and the back 6 months of this year is going to be really tricky with everybody coming back and saying, well, I want my holiday now. Because yes, they've been off, but they've not really had a holiday. So we're talking about, they've not gone off to Shanties for the week, have they, to chill out? They've been at home doing their gardening. So people will want their holidays. So that, although they can carry over for another year, that's been allowed. But yeah, a lot of employers are saying to their furloughed employees, you must take a holiday now. And you can compel people to take holidays just to help that kind of management thing. So yeah, you've got all these weird anomalies going on within the furlough scheme.
Yeah, you're right. It's going to be a very interesting second half of this year. It's going to be interesting to see what happens really and how employers are going to cope with that. Question from John 8156 here. Hi, John 8516. He says, my mechanic was called back from furlough, but says the workshop is not safe and refuses to come to work. What do we do?
Go on, Kirill.
Okay, I briefly touched on that. Well, first of all, make sure that your workshop does comply with the requirements. They're being quite detailed guidance pushed about 2-3 weeks ago now, I think, which relates to some specific workshops and factories kind of workshops environments, one of them. They're not particularly onerous. The social distancing seems to be the underlying scheme, provision of hand soap, hand washing facilities, etc., etc. And there is also a poster that the employee can fill in and then show to the staff and the customers to say, we are safe, we are compliant. So as long as the employer check that and they assure themselves there is no issue about potential health and safety, and as much as they follow the official guidance, then this employee will have no reason, no good reason to refuse to come back to work. What he seen, what looks like not a safe place for him, that's not correct, because we are compliant. So that's actually then unauthorized absence for which there is no pay, which in the worst cases may lead to dismissal.
And I suppose the more we get used to the current working conditions and the more time that elapses, issues like this shouldn't really be coming up, should they? I suppose at the moment it's still a little bit, we're still sort of, people are adapting to this new normal, really.
Well, absolutely, there is some anxiety, which is, as you say, quite understandable. And the employer, again, they can offer some reassurance to say, well, look, that's what we're supposed to do to make sure no one gets infected in the workplace. And we are following this, so there is really no need to be that much worried.
Brilliant. Okay. We've had an anonymous email come in. Understandably, the sender wants to remain anonymous. They ask, we have made our valeter redundant. We had to make a saving and decided that valeting can be amalgamated within our sales team. He has now started a claim in the Employment Tribunal saying this is not a genuine redundancy and someone else could be made redundant instead. Is he correct? Bit of a tricky issue, that one, I suppose. No?
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'm dreaming about shampies. Off you go, Kirill.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it is a bit of tricky given that there is obviously a going for the tribunal claim. But ultimately, the decision whether it is a genuine redundancy situation and who is to be made, how the efficiency needs to be achieved is down to the employer. There is little doubt that lots of businesses will be affected. They will looking how to maximize their efficiency, where to make savings just to stay afloat. And I think that will be accepted by the employment tribunals. Now, what the business has to do to achieve that saving to maximize efficiency is down to the business. If they think the best way forward, I mean, frankly, the one that can be sacrificed is the job of the valeter, and someone else can do this. Well, frankly, now Joel does cleaning in the office, so that's how we're making savings. So companies will be in that position, and I think that will be recognized by the tribunal. So how the savings is achieved is down to the company. Who's made redundant is down to the company. Now, hopefully, though, that the need for the redundancy would have been explained in the consultation with that valeter. And that's one point that businesses often overlook, that to go through a fair redundancy process, the employee will have to be consulted with. That is, it will have to be explained to him that this your job is potentially at risk of redundancy. These are, and that's the reason for this, because we think that's we have this saving to make, and that's how we think we're going to achieve this saving. If you have any alternative suggestions, we are prepared to listen to you, and that's what the business is supposed to do. Now, when it's done, that's to say, it's down to the business to make that selection for redundancy, which job goes, which job stays. It's down to them. As long if there is a pool of employees, say they have a team of 10 and they're making 5 redundant, they'll have to come up with some kind of selection criteria. Who is staying and who is going will have to be fair, and again, explain to the staff that's what you're going to apply. Say their attendance records, their performance, it could be their length of service. And as long as the employee is transparent and the staff knows which procedure is followed and how it is followed, the business pretty much have quite a bit of flexibility in how exactly redundancy is made, who's selected for redundancy and who stays.
Okay. All right. Brilliant. We've just had a couple of messages have come in, actually, one via YouTube, another one has been emailed to me. Firstly, the email. Jamie says, nobody can really answer his question on this, so he'd like me to put it to you. How are dealerships providing test drives safely within the guidelines? Are they unaccompanied? What are the insurance implications? Now, as far as I'm aware, test drives at the moment are done unaccompanied. The insurance is fine. There's no issue with insurance whatsoever. But because of those health and safety regulations, test drives have to be done unaccompanied because of the risk factor.
I think at the moment that is the recommendation, the unaccompanied test drives, but of course then you've got to make sure that the person isn't driving off with your car, isn't picking up speeding tickets and things, and that's why you need some sort of test drive pad where you get them to sign to say, yes, I'm taking the car out, I am responsible if I pick up a speeding fine. Because remember, some of these speeding fines might not be sent to you for 6 months, so you need to keep that paperwork along with your sales paperwork really from there. But from the health and safety point of view, yeah, people are saying it's unaccompanied. I don't think all insurance companies are okay with that, certainly not on a base premium. You've probably got to pay a premium to your premium to be insured for unaccompanied test drives. But yeah, that does certainly seem to be the way forward, I think. But I know the government are talking, I think this week we heard them talk about driving instructors going back to business. So that's going to be a very similar scenario. So it'll be interesting to see what the government recommend for driving instructors, because it is the same, really, isn't it? It's just two people next to each other in the front of a car. So let's see, and we'll see what they come out with that. But that's due in the next few days, I think.
That's definitely one to keep an eye on, because, like you say, it's exactly the same setup, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if it'd be okay, well, we're presuming it would be okay for driving schools. There may be some changes to the rules for dealers and salespeople. Yeah. Interesting one to keep an eye on there. John Priest has messaged saying, are you saying that under the July rules that after a work period, you have to go back to furlough for 3 weeks again? I think we touched upon that earlier on, didn't we? Which is effectively, it's effectively, if you bring somebody back for one day and then you put them on furlough, they've got to remain on furlough for 3 weeks, haven't they? Nothing's going to change in July, really.
Well, as from July, the minimum period of furlough will go down from 3 weeks to 1 week. But again, we will allow us to be doing some part-time work within that week.
Yeah. And John's just posted a second question. Can you run a 4-day week for all productive staff, claiming the 5th day as furlough? I presume you can.
I can't see any problem with this.
Yeah. Because it's effectively bringing somebody back part-time, isn't it?
Yes, but as from July, not now, but as from July, as I say, I can't see any problem with this.
Yeah. Okay, right. Just for let's just move off furlough and just touch upon distance selling, because I know it's something that you've been dealing with a lot of queries about. Gary asks, is anything we buy on the phone a distance sale? For instance, a garage phones up and tells me I need new shock absorbers fitting. So Gary's question there is everything we buy on the phone a distance sale at the moment?
Not necessarily from there. First off, the distance sale comes from the Consumer Contracts Regulations 2013. So it's consumer only. So if you've got a business buying from another business, that doesn't count at all. So it's only consumer stuff. Secondly, the business has to run an organised distance selling scheme. That is confusing in the best of times because there is no actual guidance or case law to say how many engines or car or whatever you can sell in a month before your random one-off sales turn into a scheme. And of course, with COVID, people have been doing distance sales, whether it's click and collect, reserve and collect, or whatever format they've been doing. Does that then make that a scheme? We would argue not. That's only a temporary thing, so they don't necessarily get those distance sale benefits. However, I think, as we've said before, you do need to make the decision as a business whether it is a distance sale or not, because if it is, you have to give people that 14-day paperwork. Otherwise, they have, up to a year and 14 days to change their mind, and you don't want to be exchanging a car, for example, in 8 months' time because customers got fed up with it, or they've lost their job, or they've been made redundant. But no, not everything is a distance sale. It has to be part of the scheme. Things like booking holidays, that's not a distance sale either. If someone needed emergency work done on their car, my gearbox has failed, can you do that? And that's ordered over the phone. That won't be, because that's a service that you've asked them to do there and then. So you can't then say, well, I'm not paying that because I actually didn't want that, when it's already up, running and done. But consumer products where there's no face-to-face contact at all, obvious example, anything from Amazon, clearly a distance sale from there. But there are so many little nuances and get-outs with the distance sale regulations, but you just need to know. But if it's not a consumer purchase, then it's not a distance sale, because it is from the consumer contract regulations.
Yeah. Lastly, because I know time is pretty tight for you, Richard in Surrey asks, does being a key worker give you extra rights when buying a car? I'm sure lots of dealers have been dealing with this at the moment. So Kirill, let me just turn to you. I mean, what would your answer be to that?
Very briefly, no, it doesn't. The fact that someone is a key worker doesn't put them in any extra category to say they have some additional rights. They have consumer rights like everyone else, and that's it. Brilliant.
Okay, well, nice, short, succinct answer there. Fantastic. I think we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen. But I guess we'll be running another one of these because these issues are big, aren't they? So Nona and Kirill, thank you very much for joining us today. Next week, we have Mazir Alil from Bellevue on Monday. Redgate Lodge's Scott Sibley is on Tuesday. And on Wednesday, we have Edward Lovett from Collecting Cars. Now, if you want to get involved in car dealer lives like these, you can email me, james.batchelor@blackballmedia.co.uk, or James Baggott, and you can reach him at james@blackballmedia.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter @JRRBatchelor or James Baggott @CarDealerEd, and we're both on LinkedIn and you can message us there. And if you also want to have some breaking news sent to your phone, we've got Car Dealer Magazine WhatsApp groups where we share the most important stories on our website. Get in touch with us for the link to those. And if you want to find out of the future schedule of Car Dealer Lives, then please do go to our website. Thanks again to Nona and Kirill for joining us today. Pleasure to have you on as always. And I think you've answered some fantastic questions there. And people which really needed the answers to, which just leads me to say, have a lovely weekend. See you next week. Bye-bye.